All right, what do we have? We have a special discussion on the entire MSME new system of credit recognition. Companies are required to pay suppliers within 45 days. That's the new MSME payment guideline. Non-compliance could lead to liability due to overdue amount. And this could have significant impact in terms of how companies which currently are dealing with MSME in terms of credit. Now imagine a large FMCG company. That large FMCG company, when they are supplying products to the vendors and to their respectable wholesaler and stockist, the cash is received in advance. That is the reason why some of the FMCG companies have strong cash flow. Similarly, if you are an MSME company, you are also buying it from your vendors, where you buy what could be called on credit. In Hindi, udhar mein. Now you have to make sure that in 45 days, the credit lines are neutralized. Otherwise, you will attract a liability and higher rate of taxes. It's very easy to understand, but very difficult to implement, and something which will have very far-reaching implications on how the cash in the system would evolve. And end of the March, I mean, just about every MSME and SME entrepreneur was really busy managing the entire cash flow because 31st March was the compulsion. But now that we're starting fresh, we're starting with a new law. How will this change financial planning, cash flows, and really the entire credit system for MSME? Let's take that special discussion forward. Mr. T.P. Ostwal, tax expert, and Ashok Saigal, co-chairman with CII, National MSME Council and Managing Director with Frontier Technology, joins us now. Ostwal Saab, good morning. Thank you for joining us.
Good morning.
I'll start with something very simple. Can you just break it for our viewers that what is this new process? How will this change line for MSMEs and how will this change life for big companies?
The law was amended last year in 2023, February 1st, which became effective last accounting year, which is relevant to the assessment year, which starts from today, 1st April 24-25. So those who have already done the transactions and defaulted the payment in making payment to the MSME, they will be still covered by the provisions. Now the question is, government wanted, with a good intention, they started a law that MSMEs are suffering the payment cash flow, and therefore they said all their payments must be made well within 45 days. In case if you do not make the payment within 45 days, you will suffer disallowance. However, a leeway was given. If you make the payment before the year end, then the payment will be still not disallowed, it will be allowed. There is a provision for payment of interest in such situation. In case if suppose you are delayed beyond 45 days, you are required to pay interest to MSME. That is understandable because these are penal consequences which have been inbuilt in MSME law. Now, MSMEs which are registered are required to be governed by these provisions. There are so many MSMEs which are not even registered, and therefore the issue arises is whether they are also covered or not. Now, very interestingly, take a situation. If you are buying something from MSME, say ₹1 crore, in which the MSME has made a payment of 10 lakh, profit of 10 lakhs of rupees. So your total payment of 90 lakh was for the cost, plus 10 lakh was their profit. So total 100,000 for the total purchases. If you have defaulted, if you have not paid it before the year end, whole of the amount will be disallowed. And that will be allowed in the year in which you make a payment. So therefore, if it is disallowed, you will be faced with a liability of 35% tax on you.
Okay, fair point. So I'm going to encourage Mr. Saigal here also. Saigal Saab, can you just break it for our viewers, let's say with an example. If there is a large MSME and if they are buying something on credit, if I may use the Hindi terminology, udhar mein, because a lot of industries work on credit line, textile, it works on credit line. A lot of real estate companies, they work on credit line. How will this change life for companies or industries which operate on strong credit lines where payment comes in 60 days, 90 days, 120 days, because that is the basis of that industry to exist?
The point has been mentioned by Mr. Ostwal and I think a popular misconception, which I'd like to take this opportunity to clarify for you and for all the viewers, is that this provision to pay MSMEs in 45 days is not something that came up only with the amendment of the Income Tax Act last year. This is part of the MSMED Act 2006, and it said that the payment must be made in 45 days after the date of acceptance or deemed acceptance. So it has always been on the books, and the requirement has always been there. Unfortunately, in the absence of an effective implementation mechanism, it was not being followed. So the rule, as mentioned by Mr. Ostwal, is that if you delay payment beyond the stipulated date to an MSME, you have to pay interest at 3 times the bank rate of interest. Now, there are various mechanisms, corrective mechanisms available to MSMEs, but they were cumbersome. And most cases like that ended up going to court with all the delays with which most people are familiar. So now, with this change in the Income Tax Act, the monitoring of payments to MSMEs, at least on a particular day of the year, not throughout the year, which is required to be done, but at least on a particular day of the year, become easy to monitor, easy to audit, and easy to implement. I think the biggest advantage of this is that there is now clarity in people's thinking that a commitment is a commitment. So MSMEs would be able to plan their resources better. I would like just to point out something was perhaps suggested by Mr. Oswal, that the penalty of deduction amount will not only be the cost of the goods to the MSME, but also his profit. Let's accept that profit is a part of business. Second thing is, the cost of goods is not only the cost of procured goods, it's also the cost of the overheads of running the operation. So I think it is perfectly fair, and it has been a very effective step, which most MSME enterprises that we have interacted with in CII are very clear that this is a positive step and would end up benefiting MSMEs by bringing in a sense of discipline, although in the immediate term, there are a few cancellation of orders or delays in orders.
Right.
That would not be cancellations.
Okay, so I'm again going to go back to a very simple template just for the benefit of our viewers. You are a practitioner, but from a market standpoint, let's understand what it means. And allow me to break it up, and please correct me if I go wrong in terms of explaining this for our viewers. And this question is coming for Mr. Ashok. If an MSME has supplied goods to a large company, and the historical credit line is between 90 to 120 days, as per the new law, they will now will get payment back in 45 days instead of 90 days to 120 days, which has been the prescribed norm of the industry. So let's say if you're a cardboard manufacturer, if you've given products to a large FMCG company, your payment was coming in 90 days to 120 days. Now compulsorily, it will have to come in less than 45 days. Is that correct, Ashokji?
Absolutely. In fact, it says very clearly under clause 15 of the MSMED Act that in no case, the period agreed upon between the supplier and the buyer in writing shall exceed 45 days. So in no case it should exceed 45 days. So if there is some such agreement, we have already been violating the law. Now let's follow the law.
We're trying to simply break it for our viewers. Is it as simple as what we're trying to make it sound, or would you like to add something to that? Mr. Oswal?
You're asking me?
Okay. Yes, right. I just wanted your reaction on that entire cardboard example which I carved out for our viewers.
No, what he says is correct. You see, 45 days is now statutory period within which the transaction should be completed, squared off. You must make a payment. However, if you do not make the payment within 45 days, you will be faced with a liability of interest, which is 3 times the normal rate of interest. Now, the question arises is, if you have still made the payment to that MSME prior to the year end, no disallowances in your hands. It will be allowed. But interest will not be waived. Interest is chargeable. MSME will be entitled to charge it from the person who has defaulted the payment. Now, that is one most important factor. Second factor is year end, you are required to clear it. If you are not cleared within the year end, that 45 days are over and still not clear, this disallowance under the Income Tax Act triggers to the person who has purchased something from MSME, and therefore he will suffer huge additional cost, that is disallowance. Like most of the statutory payments are subject to disallowances if you do not make the payment within before the year end or before filing your tax return. But in the case of MSME, this disallowance before filing tax return, even if you have paid, it will not be allowed. It will be still disallowed, and this will be allowed in the next year, which is an exception to the normal rule which they have created for all other statutory payments. And therefore, to that extent, this is more draconian. And I would take a view that if the interest liability is already provided, which is quite penal in the nature, why should there be a disallowance if the taxpayer makes the payment before filing his tax return to the MSME? And therefore, I would take a view that this is a good provision introduced with a view to protect the interest of MSME, but the hiccups created to the payer, because if suppose you are creating such a provision in the law, people will shift their purchases from, instead of buying it from MSME, they will find out alternative sources. If there is an unregistered MSME, I would prefer that. Or if there is a large supplier, I would prefer that, because then there is no question of disallowance of my payment and additional tax of 30% on me.
On board. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for sharing with us the implications of what exactly now this
If you like this video, then like, share and subscribe to ET Now.